on the timing of a future referendum. Now, given that it was also agreed cross-party that nothing in the Smith Commission prevents Scotland becoming an independent country in the future, can the Minister tell us whose decision is it whether Scotland has another referendum?
Order. It's got to be some relevance. I think the first question was to try and push you up the second time. We can't do that. It's got to be relevant. Right, sorry about that. We'd better move on to... we've now got to go back up to Scotland to Douglas Ross. Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The extension of the furlough scheme demonstrated again how the UK Government continues to support jobs in all 4 nations of the United Kingdom. And we need that support and joint working to continue following the positive news of a potential COVID-19 vaccine. Can the Secretary of State outline the work done between the Scottish Government and the UK Government to ensure there is a seamless rollout of this vaccine that has given us so much hope here in Scotland and across the UK?
Well, we've invested more than £230 million into manufacturing any successful vaccine. These vaccines are being procured for and paid by the UK Government on behalf of everyone in the United Kingdom. And these doses will be distributed fairly, and they'll be distributed across all parts of the United Kingdom according to population share.
6 has been moved, so we'll go to Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A business in my constituency contacted me 4 days just before furlough was supposed to end. He operates 2 bars in my constituency, and as a responsible employer, he'd kept on his 44 staff. He'd taken on the debt from bounce back loans, but he was at the absolute end of his tether with this government and the last-minute decisions. So will the Secretary of State apologise to this business operator in my constituency for the severe stress that the government's dithering had caused him, the distress that it caused his employees, and for the many people who couldn't keep on their staff and lost their jobs due to this government's incompetence?
Well, the Honourable Lady will recognise that this is a dynamic situation, and we have to take decisions, and it's an unprecedented situation. We have to take the decisions as we see what's in front of us. And I would say to those who lost their jobs after the 23rd of September, but were in employment and furlough up until the 23rd of September, their employers are allowed to bring them back and put them on furlough.
We have a substantive question to Minister Stewart. Minister Stewart from Allendorn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 8, 9 and 11 together. An effective response to COVID-19 does indeed need to be a coordinated response across the UK. On the 25th of September, the UK Government and the 3 devolved administrations published a joint statement on our collective approach to responding to COVID-19. There are very regular meetings at both ministerial and officials level.
Let's go up to Scotland to Alan Dorrans. Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I think Alan Dorrans has been cut off in his prime, so what I'm going to do is go to Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask what's the Minister's understanding of the application of the furlough scheme in Scotland, along with the other nations of the UK, given that Scotland is operating under a different tier system and different lockdown restrictions?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very glad the honourable gentleman is not vaporised into thin air. The lockdown scheme extends across the UK and is available whether a part of the UK or a part of each nation within the UK is in lockdown or not. It is there for everyone.
10 withdrawn, so we'll go to Alex Davis-Jones.
Mr Speaker. The relationship between the United Kingdom and Scottish governments on joined-up COVID-19 policy making, with the main issue being trust. What work has the Secretary of State undertaken to improve awareness and understanding of devolution among Whitehall officials so that policymakers have mutual understandings of the impact that decisions are made on each nation of the UK?
The Honourable Lady raises an important point, and I would point to the fact that I referred to in my initial answer, that there are very regular discussions between all government departments and devolved administrations at very many levels, be that health, be it transport, be it education. So I think there is a widespread understanding of the need to balance both UK-wide interventions but allowing the local flexibilities where circumstances dictate.
We're going to try and return to Alan Dorrans.
Can the Minister confirm or deny that taxpayers' money is being used to employ consultants with the sole purpose of producing and promoting negative propaganda to counter the increasingly successful campaign for Scottish independence, and is that not to the detriment of cooperation between the nations?
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite sure what that's got to do with the response to coronavirus. Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Is there anything you can answer? If not, we'll move on.
No, I don't think this is relevant to our discussion.
Okay, in which case we'll go to the Shadow Secretary of State, Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Secretary of State in recognising that it is the 11th day of the 11th month, lest we forget those that gave their lives so we could live freely today. We will always remember them. I'm disappointed that the Secretary of State didn't congratulate President-elect Joe Biden on his wonderful election in America. And given that 75% of Scots in a recent poll said they would vote for Joe Biden, they've eventually got the government that they voted for. Mr. Speaker, the announcement this week of a potential COVID vaccine is incredibly positive. While it certainly doesn't mean we have reached the end of this crisis, of course, it does perhaps signal some hope for the public. If the vaccine is approved, the country will face an unprecedented logistical challenge. If mass vaccination is to be done successfully, we will need all levels of government working together. But a poll just yesterday found that 2/3 of Scots were dissatisfied that the Scottish and UK governments don't work together, and a majority wanted closer cooperation. So can the Minister inform the House what work the UK and Scottish governments are undertaking together to build an infrastructure which will be able to distribute and administer any future vaccines to everyone?
Well, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's question. Referring to his initial comments, I was delighted that President-elect Biden spoke to our Prime Minister ahead of any other European country, contrary to what some of the naysayers in the media were predicting. But his substantial question is a very important one, and I think it does illustrate the extent to which the UK government and the devolved administrations can and should work together. The vaccine, which, as he said, we're not quite there yet, but gives very strong hope, is purchased by the UK government on behalf of the whole UK. The distribution, the prioritisation of the vaccine will be a matter for the devolved administrations, but we are in regular contact and stand ready to assist with any logistics that will be required to make sure it's distributed on the basis of clinical priority and not any other needs.
We now come to Ian Murray.
Thank you very much. I appreciate what the Minister just said, but I think the public would look very unfavourably if both governments didn't work together to ensure that this vaccine is distributed. But we also mustn't lose sight of today's challenges. Whilst the Chancellor's latest plan to extend furlough until March is very welcome, there remains millions of people across the UK and in Scotland who have not received any support as lockdowns continue. The 3 million taxpayers excluded from government support include countless self-employed, PAYE freelancers and many, many others. It's understandable that there may have been some cracks in hastily designed schemes announced in March, but not to fix these and continue to exclude millions from any support is inexcusable. I raised this with the Secretary of State in this House on the 1st of July and the 7th of October. So for the third time, will the Scotland Office demand that the Chancellor reconsiders and provides support to those taxpayers left without any help from this government?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman's question would have greater potency if furlough was indeed the only scheme that was available. But there is a wide range of support available for businesses and individuals right across the UK that includes bounce-back loans, tax deferrals, mortgage holidays and the like. In addition, the Chancellor has provided to the Scottish Government unprecedented levels of support, going up an additional £1 billion. And it's up to the Scottish Government, if they wish to provide additional support over and above the UK-wide schemes, that they have the resources to do so.
Can I just say, I'm very concerned that it was a substantive question that was within this grouping. The problem is the grouping's not good, but it was the government that put the grouping together. So I think the Minister ought to try and see if he could answer the question from Alan Dorrans, because it is within that section.
Forgive me, if I remember the question correctly, is are we spending taxpayers' money on fighting the independence referendum. My answer to that is we do not wish another independence referendum. The last thing the people of Scotland need, the businesses in Scotland need, the jobs in Scotland need, is the uncertainty that another independence referendum would create.
At least there is an answer, even if it's not the kind I wished. Rachel Pascoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 14, please.
I meet regularly with Scottish ministers to discuss matters of importance to Scotland. Funding for the voluntary sector and community organisations in Scotland is a matter for the Scottish Government. But before the Honourable Lady asks her supplementary, may I take this opportunity to pay tribute to the enormous work that charities and voluntary organisations do in Scotland and the UK to support our communities through this very challenging period.
Rachel Pascoe.
Thank you. Charities and social enterprises are never more needed across the UK, but may I correct the Minister to say that the Government put forward a fund of £60 million for charities within the devolved authorities, and therefore I would like to know how much the Scottish charities have received from that fund, what representations he's made for the extension of that fund, because charities are never more in need.
I would just say to the Honourable Lady, the funding that's given to the Scottish Government does not necessarily have to be used exactly for those purposes. They can supplement that as well out of the general funds that are transferred, the £8.2 billion. I'm very happy to look into how that money's been spent, and I would refer back to the question that my honourable friend from Roxburgh and Berwickshire asked about the questions that are there over how the £2 billion has been spent.
We now come to Shadow Minister Chris Elmore.
Can I join the Minister on behalf of this side of the House in praising the voluntary sector and charities across Scotland who have stepped up to support so many people right across the nation. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, charities have faced an existential financial crisis, and earlier this year the Minister will be aware that a report from the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator found that a fifth of Scottish charities were facing uncertainty because of poor finances over the next 12 months. With new restrictions now coming in across Scotland at different phases, can the Minister commit to working with the Secretary of State, with Scottish ministers and importantly with the Chancellor of the Exchequer to ensure that these voluntary sector organisations get any additional funding that they may need to support the people of Scotland during the pandemic?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his question. He is right, and I've had a number of meetings with the Association of Chief Officers of Scottish voluntary organisations, and they have an unprecedented leadership challenge. One of them put it to me, the analogy that they're trying to fix the wings of an aircraft when it's in flight. And there's an enormous challenge on all of us, whether in government, in the charities themselves and private sector, to work closely together to help them through this and for them to help us rebuild our economy and society better than we went into this period. 16 is withdrawn, so the substantive question is from David Mundell. Secretary Jack to answer the substantive part. Can you answer the substantive first?
So am I answering David Mundell's question?
No, you're answering the substantive of 16, which allows David Mundell to ask.
Right, well, I didn't bring that with me, sorry.
Okay. All right. Let's carry on. Not got the answer, it's easy. David
Technical
Mundell.
detail.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many different ways that this government can provide economic support to Scottish businesses during COVID-19. For the Scotch whisky industry, the biggest help in retaining jobs and supporting their businesses would be for the government to resolve the US tariffs dispute rather than escalate it by applying further retaliatory tariffs. So can my right honourable friend update the House on progress on this vital issue for Scottish businesses and jobs?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the question 16 from memory, and it's not actually in my revised, it's been withdrawn altogether in the papers I was given this morning, was about transport. And I will say on that,
Jack, it's not. It's on the order paper. I can assure him it's not. But do answer this question. We need to get to it.
So in answering my right honourable friend's question, the Secretary of State for International Trade, I know that last night she had a Zoom call with MPs from right across the House, And I know that she stressed in that the UK government's determined to settle this issue as soon as possible and to mitigate the effects of those that are impacted by it. And in short, we continue to raise this issue with the highest levels of the US administration.
Beth Everett.
18, sir.
The good news is I did bring that one with me. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 18, 19, 20 and 21 together. This government has always stressed the importance of the Union. The UK is a family of nations that shares social, cultural and economic ties that together make us far safer, more secure and more prosperous. As we have seen throughout the COVID crisis, it is the economic strength of the Union, our commitment to sharing and pooling of resources, that has supported jobs and businesses throughout Scotland. And it is the strength of our Union which will enable us to rebuild our economy following this crisis.
Ben Everett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to hear that the Secretary of State supports the Union. The Prime Minister's review into boosting transport links across the country is very, very welcome. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that this review into quality transport links will go a long, long way to levelling up economic opportunity wherever we are in the UK?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, there are no flies at my honourable friend. He spotted that I'm a unionist, and he's also been able to highlight the importance of improving transport links. And that's why I'm so disappointed that the Scottish Government are not engaging in Sir Peter Hendy's review of connectivity across our United Kingdom. And it's just an attitude that's letting down the people of Scotland who would benefit from those improvements.
We now come to Caroline Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My great-grandfather served in the infantry regiment of the Argyll and Sutherland. Would my right honourable friend join me in commemorating all those Scottish servicemen who fought in the British Army for the freedom of the United Kingdom and the world, and in thanking servicemen and women today in Scotland who are engaged in our fight against the virus?
Yeah. Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to join my honourable friend in thanking today's servicemen and women. And I'm sure, again, the whole House will join me in remembering all those who laid down their lives in defence of our country and the freedoms that we enjoy today.
Yeah. I represent a constituency geographically distant from Scotland, but I know people from Scotland have made East Devon their home. They, like me, believe we are stronger together and cherish our precious union. Does my right honourable friend agree that the UK government's efforts during the pandemic, not least the furlough scheme, and £8.2 billion to the Scottish public services, show we have a common drive to defeat the virus, whether in Edinburgh or Exeter, and the SNP need to focus on delivery, not division?
Seriously.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in the interest of brevity, and it was a very fulsome question, I'll say absolutely yes.
James Grundy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What measures are my right honourable friend's department taking to strengthen economic ties and promote business opportunities between Scottish communities and English communities like those in my constituency of Lee?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Union Connectivity Review I referred to earlier and the UK Internal Market Bill currently going through Parliament will both promote the economic ties that he refers to. Those will protect vital trading links and they will improve transport links.
Right, let's check this out with Pete Wishart. Pete Wishart in Scotland.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I just say to the Secretary of State, he's doing such a fantastic job in strengthening the union, that support for independence is at a historic high and has been at a sustained majority all year. And can I say to him, saying no to a majority in Scotland is only going to drive support for independence even higher. But apparently he was only joking when he said that there would be no India ref for 40 years, just after John Major said there would be 2 referendums in the next few years. And of course, he's renowned for his legendary wit and humour, but the Scottish people are not finding this democracy denial funny anymore. So what's the difference between denying a majority in the Trump White House and denying a majority in the Scotland office?
Yeah, quite a tenuous link there, but I'll answer. I mean, to be quite simple, my belief is that we stick to the referendum and respect it from 2014. It was very clear, the SNP said at the time, it was once in a generation. I don't believe we should go into a process of never-endums, which are divisive, unsettling, bad for jobs in Scotland. We should respect democracy, and that's what I'm doing, democracy that was handed out by the Scottish people in 2014.
Let us go across Scotland to Dr. Philippa Whitford. Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Last December's general election is once in a generation, but I hope the Secretary of State isn't suggesting there won't be another one for 40 years. He seems to think the way to strengthen the Union is by forcing a hard Brexit on Scotland against our will, taking an axe to devolution with the Internal Market Bill, and denying any democratic choice on Scotland's future until adults like me are dead. On that basis, does he think the best recipe for a happy marriage is to lock up the wife, take away her chequebook, and just keep refusing a divorce?
Secretary of State.
No, I think it's quite straightforward. I think people should respect democracy. As I've said in my previous question to the member for Perth, we are respecting democracy. We are saying, we are acknowledging once in a generation. We don't believe Scotland should be thrown onto the uncertainty of never-endums. And it's very straightforward. A generation, by any calculation, is 25 years. And frankly, you know, you just have to accept that and focus on what matters, which is recovering from this pandemic and us all pulling together.
We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. And we start the questions with Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to Home Office figures... question one. Sorry.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to join me in sending our deepest sympathies to the family and friends of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who sadly passed away on Saturday. His leadership had a profound impact on our whole country and across the world. May his memory be a blessing. Mr. Speaker, this morning I attended the service at Westminster Abbey to mark the centenary of the tomb of the unknown warrior. Armistice Day allows us to give thanks to all of those who have served and continue to serve, and those who have given their lives in service of this country.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to Home Office figures, just 12% of Windrush victims have received compensation and 9 people have died waiting. This is 2.5 years after the Windrush Task Force was set up. What will the government do, and what will the Prime Minister do, to both rectify this injustice, but also ensure that no others who have come to the UK to live and work do not suffer in the same way as the Windrush victims?
Prime Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady is right to raise this issue, and it is what happened to the Windrush generation was a disgrace and a scandal, and we're doing our best collectively to make amends. And I can tell that I've met members of that generation, and this government is taking steps to accelerate the payments and to make sure that those who are in line with payments are given every opportunity, all the information they need to avail themselves of the compensation that they deserve.
Fiona Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister in respect for our servicemen and women, past and present, in protecting our peace? With regard to our battle against COVID, senior church leaders have this past week issued a call for prayer across our nation. The Prime Minister, I know, is very well aware of the persecution suffered by countless people of faith across the world for wanting to pray and manifest their faith. Will he join me in supporting our church leaders' call for prayer and in championing the universal human right of freedom of religion or belief wherever one lives?
Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the work that she does to champion that cause. And we all know that wherever freedom of belief is under attack, other human rights are under attack as well, and we will continue to work closely with like-minded partners to stand up for members of such marginalised communities.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Prime Minister in his comments about Jonathan Sachs? Can I also send all of our thoughts to those affected by the terrible events in Saudi Arabia this morning? Can I welcome the victory of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, a new era of decency, integrity and compassion in the White House? And can I also welcome the fantastic news about a possible breakthrough in the vaccine? It's early days, but this will give hope to millions of people that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Speaker, today is Armistice Day, and I'm sure the whole House will join me in praising the remarkable work of the veterans' charities such as Help for Heroes and the Royal British Legion. Like many other charities, Help for Heroes has seen significant drop in its funding during this pandemic, and they're now having to take very difficult decisions about redundancies and keeping open recovery centres for veterans. So can the Prime Minister commit today that the government will do whatever it can to make sure our armed force charities have the support that they need so that they can carry on supporting our veterans?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I echo entirely what the Right Honourable Gentleman says about Help for Heroes. It's a quite remarkable charity and does wonderful things for veterans. And in these difficult times, many charities are, of course, finding it tough. In addition to what the government is doing to support charities through cutting VAT on their cutting business rates on their premises and cutting VAT on their shops, Mr. Speaker, I would also urge everybody, wherever possible, to make online contributions to charities that are currently struggling.
I thank the Prime Minister for his reply. The truth is, the Chancellor's package for forces charities was just £6 million during this pandemic, and that's just not sufficient. Can I ask the Prime Minister to reconsider that support on their behalf? Because at the same time, we've all seen this weekend that the government can find £670,000 for PR consultants. And Mr. Speaker, that's the tip of the iceberg. New research today shows that the government has spent at least £130 million of taxpayers' money on PR companies, and that's this year alone. Does the Prime Minister think that that's a reasonable use of taxpayers' money?
Mr. Speaker, I think he's referring to the Vaccines Task Force, and after days in which the Labour Party has attacked the Vaccines Task Force, I think it might be in order for him to pay tribute to them for securing 40 million doses. And by the way, the expenditure to which he refers was to help raise awareness of vaccines, to fight the anti-vaxxers, Mr. Speaker, and to persuade the people of this country, 300,000, to take part in trials without which we can't have vaccines, Mr. Speaker. So I think he should take it back.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, nobody's attacking individuals. Everybody's supporting the vaccine. £130 million, Prime Minister. There's a real question about the way that contracts are being awarded, about basic transparency and accountability. And I know the Prime Minister doesn't like that. This is not the Prime Minister's money, Mr. Speaker. It's taxpayers' money. The Prime Minister may well not know the value of the pound in his pocket, but the people who send us here do, and they expect us to spend it wisely. Let me illustrate an example of the government's lax attitude to taxpayers' money. Earlier this year, the government paid about £150 million to a company called Iandel Capital to deliver face masks. Can the Prime Minister tell the House how many usable face masks were actually provided to NHS workers on the front line under that contract?
Mr. Speaker, we're in the middle of a global pandemic in which this government has so far secured and delivered 32 billion items of personal protective equipment. And yes, it is absolutely correct, Mr. Speaker, that it's been necessary to work with the private sector, with manufacturers who provide equipment such as this, some of them more effectively than others, Mr. Speaker. But it's the private sector that in the end makes the PPE. It's the private sector that provides the testing equipment, Mr. Speaker, and it's the private sector that, no matter how much the party opposite may hate them, it's the private sector that provides the vaccines and the scientific breakthroughs, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
The answer is none. Not a single face mask, at a cost of £150 million. Mr. Speaker, that's not an isolated example. We already know that consultants are being paid £7,000 a day to work on test and trace, and a company called Randox has been given a contract without process for £347 million. That's the same company that had to recall 750,000 unused COVID tests earlier this summer on safety grounds. And there's a sharp contrast between the way the government sprays money at companies who don't deliver and their reluctance to provide long-term support to businesses and working people at the sharp end of this crisis. The Chancellor spent months saying that extending furlough was, these were his words, not the kind of certainty that British businesses or British workers need, only then to do a U-turn at the last minute. Yesterday's unemployment figures show the cost of that delay. Redundancies up by a record 181,000 in the last quarter. What's the Prime Minister's message to those that have lost their jobs because of the Chancellor's delay?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, with great respect to the right honourable gentleman, he knows full well that the furlough programme has continued throughout this pandemic. It went right the way through to October. It's now going through to March. It's one of the most generous programmes in the world. 80% of income supported by this government. An overall package of £210 billion, Mr. Speaker, going in to support jobs, families and livelihoods throughout this country. I think this country can be very proud of the way we've looked after the entire population when we are going to continue to do so. And he should bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, that the net effect of those furlough programmes, all the provision that we have made, is disproportionately beneficial for the poorest and neediest in society, which is what One Nation conservatism is all about, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister must know that because the furlough wasn't extended until the last minute, thousands of people were laid off. And the figures tell a different story. Redundancies, as I say, record high, 181,000, 780,000 off the payroll since March. ONS saying unemployment is rising sharply. So much for putting their arms around everybody. The trouble is that the British people are paying the price for the mistakes of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. If they'd handed contracts to companies that could deliver, public money would have been saved. If they'd extended furlough sooner, jobs would have been saved. If they'd brought in a circuit breaker when the science said so, lives would have been saved. Let me deal with another mistake. The Chancellor's repeatedly failed to close gaps in support for the self-employed. Millions are affected by this. It's bad enough to have made that mistake in March. But 7 months on, the Institute of Fiscal Studies says the scheme remains, their words, wasteful and badly targeted for the self-employed. The Institute of Directors, many self-employed continue to be left out in the cold. After 7 months and so many warnings, why are the Chancellor and the Prime Minister still failing our self-employed?
Mr. Speaker, unquestionably this pandemic has been hard on the people of this country, and unquestionably there are people who have suffered throughout the pandemic and people whose livelihoods have suffered. But we have done everything that we possibly can to help. And as for the self-employed, Mr. Speaker, 2.6 million of them have received support at a cost of £13 billion. Quite right, Mr. Speaker. We've also, of course, as he knows, uprated universal credit. That will continue until next year, Mr. Speaker. He now champions universal credit, by the way, and calls for it uprating to be extended. He stood on a manifesto, Mr. Speaker, to abolish universal credit.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister just doesn't get it. I know very well that the self-employment income support scheme has been extended, but the Prime Minister must know that scheme simply doesn't apply to millions of self-employed people. They've been left out for 7 months. And there's a real human cost to this. This week on LBC, I spoke to a self-employed photographer called Chris. He said to me, our industry's been devastated. There's 3 million of us that have fallen through the cracks. Our businesses are falling, absolutely falling, and crashing each day. He asked me to raise that with the Chancellor. I'll do the next best thing. What would the Prime Minister say to Chris and millions like him who are desperately waiting for the Chancellor to address this injustice?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I would say to Chris and what I say to the right honourable gentleman and to the whole country is the best way to get his job working again, the best way to get this country back on its feet is to continue on the path that we are of driving the virus down. And I'm grateful to the people. This is a week, Mr. Speaker, since we entered into the tough autumn measures that we're now in. I'm grateful to the people of this country for the sacrifices that they're making. And I'm particularly grateful to the people of Liverpool and elsewhere who are now taking part, tens of thousands of people in Liverpool, taking part in the mass testing work that's going on there. And it's fantastic news that we now have the realistic prospect of a vaccine, Mr. Speaker. But science has given us two big boxing gloves, as it were, with which to pummel this virus, but neither of them is capable of delivering a knockout blow on its own. And that's why this country needs to continue to work hard, to keep discipline, and to observe the measures that we've put in. And I'm grateful to the party opposite, grateful for the support that they're now giving for those measures. That is the way to do it, Mr. Speaker. Hands, face, space, follow the guidance, protect the NHS and save lives.
Let's head to Tewkesbury with Lawrence Robertson. Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we and all countries across the world tackle the pandemic, is it not right that we also have to secure our post-EU future? And aren't we doing that by securing help for our rural communities and indeed securing our borders?
Prime Minister.
Absolutely. Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I can tell him that the landmark immigration bill receives royal assent today, thanks to this House, paving the way for our fulfilling of our manifesto commitment to end free movement and have a new, fair, points-based immigration system, Mr. Speaker. One of the advantages of leaving the European Union, which the gentleman opposite would of course like to reverse.
Let's head up to Scotland to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister on the death of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks? And of course, this being Armistice Day, that we commemorate the day 102 years ago in the 11th hour of the 11th month when the guns fell silent, and all those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice in conflict since then. And of course, I would wish to send our best wishes to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in winning the election in North America, and look forward to the leadership that they will show on issues of climate change and the issue of fighting back against COVID, amongst other things. Mr. Speaker, the Office of National Statistics figures published yesterday demonstrate what the SNP have been warning about for months, that the UK faces a growing Tory unemployment crisis. It is now beyond doubt that the Chancellor's last-minute furlough U-turn came far too late for thousands who've already lost their jobs as a result of Tory cuts and delays in the dither that took place. UK unemployment has now risen to 4.8%. Redundancies are at a record high, and nearly 800,000 fewer people are in employment. To support those who have lost their incomes, will the Prime Minister now commit to make the £20 uplift to universal credit permanent and extend it to legacy benefits so that no one, Prime Minister, is left behind?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the right honourable gentleman, the leader of Scottish Nationalists, is now supporting universal credit because he was opposed to it at the last election. Yes, of course, that uplifting continues, Mr. Speaker, until March, and I'm delighted to say that the furlough scheme is being extended right the way through to March as well, and that will support people across our whole United Kingdom, protecting jobs and livelihoods across the whole UK in exactly the way that he and I would both want.
Right, let's return to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I respectfully say to the Prime Minister, the idea is that the Prime Minister tries to answer the question that's been put to him, and it is shameful that the Prime Minister still refuses to give a commitment to the uprating of the £20 to universal credit. And the SNP will continue to demand a permanent U-turn on Tory plans to cut universal credit. Mr. Speaker, another group who've been left behind by this Prime Minister are the 3 million people who have been completely excluded from UK government support. Since the start of this crisis, the Prime Minister has repeatedly refused to lift a finger to help these families. Can I say to him, in the run-up to Christmas, the forgotten millions will be amongst those who are struggling to get by and worried about their future? So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he finally fix the serious gaps in his support schemes to help the excluded, or will he make it a bitter winter for millions of families across the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman knows, I hope, that we're not only continuing with the uprating of universal credit until next year. We've invested 210 billion, as I say, in jobs and livelihoods, but we've also just brought forward a winter support package, Mr. Speaker, for the poorest and neediest, supporting people, young people, kids who need school meals, supporting people throughout our society, throughout the tough period of COVID, as I think the entire country would expect. That is the right thing to do, and we will continue to do it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we continue to protect the NHS to help save lives, regional airports are playing a critical role delivering medical supplies and equipment across the UK. Yet, at Exeter Airport in my constituency of East Devon, overall passenger numbers are at some 5% of normal. Regional airports are facing multi-billion-pound business rates bills and are asking for a payment holiday similar to businesses in retail and hospitality, including supermarket giants. What assurances can my right honourable friend give East Devon's aircraft engineers, cabin crew and pilots that the government will look to temporarily scrap business rates so our regional airports can keep the country connected throughout this pandemic?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm sure my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will have heard his words. I thank him for what he said. He's quite right to champion regional airports and the aviation business. I can tell him that the Bank of England's COVID corporate financing facility is helping the support the airlines' current liquidity problems, with the sector drawing down £1.8 billion in support. And we're also, the Department of Transport is looking at giving bespoke support to particular regional airports in order, Mr. Speaker, to keep them going in these tough times.
Jonathan Evans.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Mr. Speaker. West Wales and the Valleys received over €2 billion in direct EU economic investment during the 2014-20 multi-annual financial framework. This support will come to an end in a matter of weeks, yet the British government have yet to publish its alternative proposals, despite all the promises of not a penny less. When will he level with the people of Carmarthenshire and the rest of Wales that the British government are about to pick our pockets?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, the UK government is continuing to support all parts of the UK. Will now, as he knows, have the opportunity to fund projects with our own money rather than siphoning it through Brussels. And the quantum, Mr. Speaker, will be identical. And I can tell him that in addition, through the Barnett formula, the UK government has already given the Welsh government £2.4 billion in capital funding alone this year.
Mr. Speaker, whilst we are rightly focused on battling COVID, we should not ignore humanitarian injustices and the plight of persecuted minorities. On Remembrance Sunday, 82-year-old Mahbub Ahmad Khan was shot dead, the fourth Ahmadi recently slain in Peshawar. His crime under Pakistani law? To call himself an Ahmadi Muslim, whose creed is love for all, hatred for none. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that hatred preached in Pakistan ends up on the streets of Britain, and it is in the interest of our own security that Her Majesty's government should make clear to Pakistan that state-supported persecution must end?
Well, I agree passionately with my honourable friend, and I can tell him that is why the Minister for South Asia recently raised this very issue with Pakistan's Human Rights Minister, and we urge the government of Pakistan to guarantee the fundamental rights of all its citizens.
Unfortunately, we've recently seen the largest increase in Welsh unemployment for nearly 30 years. Now, the Prime Minister will know that the hospitality and event sectors have been dealt a heavy blow by COVID-19, but we cannot forget about the businesses in their supply chains. Many have not been eligible for grant support, and although welcome, bounce-back loans and the furlough scheme do not offer them support to cover running costs through the winter months. Will the Prime Minister therefore raise this matter with the Chancellor and bring forward a package that offers businesses in the supply chain some hope of seeing the spring?
Prime Minister.
He raises an excellent point, and one of the things that we're looking at together with local authorities and Welsh tourist authorities is ways of making sure that we keep a tourist season going throughout the tough winter months.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Christmas is a time for joy and the celebration of hope. In Rother Valley, we have a renowned Christmas scene. From the Christmas Festival in Diddington, Christmas wreath making in Toddwick, the Maltby Lions Santa Sleigh Ride, carols at All Saints Aston, and even my own new annual Christmas card competition. There is something for everyone in Rother Valley. In this spirit of Christmas and giving, will the Prime Minister assure me that families and friends will be reunited and be able to celebrate this most important, happy and holy occasion as we usually do?
What I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that the more intensively we together follow the rules, the more we follow the guidance in this tough period leading up to the 2nd of December, the bigger the chance collectively we will have of as normal a Christmas as possible, Mr. Speaker, and get things open in time for Christmas as well.
Let's head up to Ealing North with James Murray. James Murray.
Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, a constituent emailed me about the track and trace system. Her family had received multiple calls asking for the same information, and there was confusion as the operative admitted they were struggling with London postcodes and local school names. Last week, the former Health Secretary, the Conservative Chair of the Health Select Committee, said that centralised contact tracing is always going to be less effective than a localised model. Will the Prime Minister now admit that the current outsourced model has been a waste of time and taxpayers' money?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're looking into the issue of repeat calls, but I think to say that the test and trace system has been a waste of time and money, which is, I think, what I heard him say, I couldn't disagree more, Mr. Speaker. This has been something that has enabled us to locate where the disease is surging, to take appropriate measures, and to allow people in huge numbers to get tested, more people tested in this country than any other country in Europe. I think the PCR tests that NHS Test and Trace have been conducting have been of real value in fighting the disease. And now, Mr. Speaker, as you know, we're rolling out the lateral flow, the rapid turnaround tests as well.
Let's head up to Yorkshire with Julian Sturdy. Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, with yesterday's positive news on the COVID vaccine and the rollout of mass testing, and as York's virus figures continue to fall well below the level at which we were put into Tier 2, can the Prime Minister give York some hope to sustain our great city by clearly outlining the criteria under which we can escape immediately into Tier 1 from the 2nd of December? And will he also urge York Council to take up the government's offer of mass testing?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I urge York Council and councils across the land to take up this offer of mass lateral flow testing. I think it's a very, very exciting possibility. It's one of the, as I say, one of the boxing gloves that we hope to wield to pummel this disease into submission. The other is the prospect of a vaccine, and that is what we will do continuously throughout the weeks and months ahead. But I must stress that the way to get ourselves in the best position to achieve that, Mr. Speaker, is to make these current restrictions work so that we can come out well back into the tiers on December the 2nd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will doubtless recall meeting my constituent Ronnie Norquay on board his crab boat Carvela when he visited Stromness in Orkney in July. I know that Mr Norquay told the Prime Minister about the problems caused by the Migration Advisory Committee classing deckhands as unskilled labour. Since his conversation, which must have landed quite well because he was allowed back onto dry land safely, the Migration Advisory Committee has changed their advice so that deckhands are now regarded as skilled labour for whom visas can be issued. The Home Secretary, unfortunately, refuses to implement that advice. Will he put the Home Secretary straight on this one, please? Get it sorted.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. It's a subject on which I have a keen interest because I had a wonderful day on that, a wonderful morning on that crab boat. They have fantastic, prodigious quantities of crabs. They were selling to China as I recollect, and I will make sure that the Home Secretary is immediately seized of the matter, and we take it forward. But this is one of the things that we are now able to do, thanks to taking back control, Mr. Speaker, of our immigration system, which, alas, his party opposed for so long, and his party, Mr. Speaker, would reverse if they could.
Hello, Brian. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the introduction of the National Security and Investment Bill today. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that when countries trample human rights at home and threaten our allies abroad, they shouldn't expect to be able to buy up strategically important industries in this country with no scrutiny, not least where they refuse the same kind of investments in their own countries?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. One of the many merits of the excellent conversation I had yesterday with President-elect Joe Biden was that we were strongly agreed on the need once again for the United Kingdom and the United States to stand together, to stick up for our values around the world, to stick up for human rights, to stick up for global free trade, to stick up for NATO, Mr. Speaker, and to work together in the fight against climate change, Mr. Speaker. And it was refreshing, I may say, to have that conversation. I look forward to many more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister spoke for many of us when he took a call yesterday to congratulate President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris on their emphatic win in the US presidential election. So does the Prime Minister now have any advice for his erstwhile best friend, President Trump, whose continuing refusal to accept the result is both embarrassing for him and dangerous for American democracy?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I had and have a good relationship with the previous president. I do not resile from that. This is the duty of all British Prime Ministers to have a good relationship with the White House. But I'm delighted to find the many areas in which the incoming Biden-Harris administration is able to make common cause with us. In particular, it was extremely exciting to talk to President-elect Biden about what he wants to do with the COP26 summit next year, Mr. Speaker, in which, as you know, the UK is leading the world in driving down carbon emissions and tackling climate change.
Chris Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Armistice Day, restrictions mean that we can't mark the occasion with services as we normally would. However, in Haywood and Middleton, veterans associations are following the guidance to mark the day in a COVID-safe way. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, join me in praising them, the Royal British Legion, and indeed everybody across the United Kingdom who are doing their best to make sure that we can pay tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. And it was really impressive to see the way the Royal British Legion across the country organised COVID-secure memorials in the way that they did. And as we salute our veterans, I just want to remind the House that we've launched a new rail card for our veterans and their families, entitling their users to substantial reductions in rail fares, and we're introducing a national insurance break for employers of veterans, Mr. Speaker, in their first year of employment.
Let's head up to Lancashire with Kate to Learn. Kate to Learn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day there's a new story about dodgy contracts signed by this government. Research by Tussell, the data provider, shows that the government takes an average of 2.5 months to publish COVID-related contracts exceeding the legal limit of 30 days. Will the Prime Minister commit to publishing all contracts within the legal limit, and does he accept that failure to address this scandal mires his government's awarding of public contracts?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we publish all contracts, and quite right. But I would just respectfully remind the honourable ladies, I reminded the right honourable gentleman earlier on, it is absolutely necessary in a massive global pandemic to work with the private sector, not to scorn them or despise them, but to understand that it is they who make PPE, it's they who make the tests, and indeed, as I said, it is thanks to the researches of giant conglomerates, Mr. Speaker, giant conglomerates which they would break up if they could, that we have the possibility of a vaccine.
Andrew Salute.
On Armistice Day, as we remember those who gave their lives for our country and those who still serve, will the Prime Minister give a positive response to the Living in Our Shoes report to make life better for armed forces families? These wonderful people put up with more separation, moving of family homes and worry about the safety of their loved ones than anyone else, and looking after them should be a national priority.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our armed services simply could not function without the support of their families, and I thank him for what he's doing also to raise this issue and for the comprehensive piece of research that he refers to. And we are making good progress, Mr. Speaker, in increasing childcare provision for armed services families and also support for employment of partners of members of the armed services.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I am suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.